My name is Tom Reyes. I'm 43 years old. Before all this, I would have told you I had a good life. A wife named Claire, two kids, a third one on the way, and a house in a quiet suburb outside Columbus that we'd spent a decade making into a home. I would have told you I was one of the lucky ones. It started small, the way these things always do. A few months into Claire's pregnancy, she started sending the kids off on weekend trips, camping with her sister, a visit to my parents 2 states over, a sleepover that stretched into a whole weekend at a friend's house. She said she just needed quiet time, needed space to breathe while her body was doing something exhausting. I believed her. Pregnancy is hard. I told myself I was being supportive by not asking too many questions. Then the small things started stacking up. Her phone, which used to sit face up on the kitchen counter, started living in silent mode, screen down, carried into the bathroom with her every time. She stayed up late scrolling through something she called work emails, though she'd never brought work home in 11 years of marriage. One evening, I hugged her hello and caught a trace of perfume that wasn't hers, something expensive, the kind you smell in a hotel lobby, not on laundry day. Another night, the mileage on her car didn't match anywhere close to the errands she said she'd run. I didn't say anything. I decided quietly that I'd find out for myself before I said a single word out loud. I started with our bank statements, going back several months. There were charges from restaurants we'd never been to together, a hotel charge in a nearby city that made no sense for a woman who claimed to be running errands. Then I checked our cloud backup, the one our phones sync to, automatically without either of us thinking about it. Buried in a folder of deleted images, I found photos of Claire with a man I didn't recognize. Not compromising, not damning on their own, but wrong in a way I couldn't explain to anyone who hadn't lived inside our marriage for 11 years. From there, I started connecting everything. Old location data, digital receipts, parking tickets sitting in the glove compartment, call logs going back further than I expected. Each new piece made the previous lie bigger than it had been the day before. I learned she'd been meeting a coworker named Derek regularly for months. They deleted their messages after every exchange, but the cloud sync had quietly preserved fragments neither of them remembered existed. One afternoon, I sat outside Derek's office building after work, telling Claire I had a late meeting. I watched the two of them leave separately, walk 2 different directions down the block, and then get into the same car 3 streets over, the way people do when they think nobody's paying attention. Over the following 2 weeks, I kept watching, careful, quiet, never confrontational. I built a timeline out of hotel check-ins, parking garage footage timestamps, and the CCTV records a few businesses let me pull with a polite request and a story about a missing wallet. I noticed that on more than one occasion, the girls' day Claire mentioned to me hadn't included a single friend of hers. I confirmed it myself, quietly, by asking 2 of those friends how their weekend had been. The last piece came from an old cloud folder I almost didn't bother opening. It held deleted photos, short video clips, hotel booking confirmations, digital receipts, and travel dates going back the better part of a year. Suddenly, I had an entire timeline laid out in front of me. Every lie, every meeting, every excuse, and every time she'd sent our kids away so the house would be empty for a few hours. I didn't say a word for weeks. Some part of me kept hoping she'd tell me herself, that some flicker of guilt would push her toward honesty before I had to force it into the open. She never did. If anything, she got more relaxed, more affectionate, like she believed she'd gotten away with something completely. One evening, after the kids were in bed, I sat her down at the dining room table and laid it all out, piece by piece in order. Bank records first, then location history, then the photos, then hotel receipts, parking logs, the cloud backups, and a printed transcript of messages she thought had disappeared forever. She denied it at first, said I was imagining connections that weren't there. Then her story started shifting, small details changing each time I asked a follow-up question. By the 3rd version of events, she stopped talking altogether and just sat there, staring at the pile of evidence like it belonged to someone else's life. What came next wasn't loud. I didn't throw anything, didn't raise my voice, didn't wake the kids. I told her I wanted a paternity test for the baby she was carrying because by that point, I no longer trusted a single date on the calendar she'd given me. She resisted at first, called it insulting, said, of course the baby was mine. I told her the test wasn't optional anymore, not after everything I'd found. The results came back 3 weeks after our daughter was born. She wasn't mine. I remember holding her in the hospital room days earlier, feeling something I still can't fully put into words. and then having that feeling complicated by a piece of paper that changed the entire shape of my family without asking my permission first. The divorce and custody proceedings that followed weren't dramatic in the way people expect from stories like this. There was no shouting match in a courtroom, no dramatic reveal in front of a judge. Just months of paperwork, mediation sessions, and a mountain of evidence that made most of the arguing unnecessary. Claire's lawyer tried to paint me as controlling for keeping records the way I had, but the judge didn't see it that way. The documentation spoke for itself. Dates, receipts, timestamps, and a paternity result that made the timeline impossible to argue with. I got full custody of our 2 older children, the 2 who were unquestionably mine, the 2 who'd spent years watching me coach their soccer games and help with homework at this same kitchen table. Claire retained parental rights to our newborn daughter, alongside Derek, once paternity was legally established on his end as well. It wasn't the family I signed up for. It wasn't the family I thought I was building for over a decade, but it was the truth, finally sitting in the open instead of buried in a cloud folder somewhere. I sold the house 8 months later. I couldn't walk through those rooms without remembering every weekend I'd packed the kids' bags myself, thinking I was giving my exhausted pregnant wife the peace and quiet she said she needed. I bought a smaller place across town, something with no history attached to it, something entirely mine. My kids ask about their sister sometimes. I don't have an easy answer for them yet. I tell them the truth in pieces, as much as they're old enough to understand, and I make sure they know none of what happened was ever their fault. People ask me if I regret digging as deep as I did, piecing together months of evidence instead of confronting her the moment something first felt off. I don't. If I'd confronted her early, with nothing but suspicion and a strange smell on her jacket, she would have talked her way out of it the same way she always did. It was the evidence, laid out calmly and completely, that finally made denial impossible. I didn't get revenge. I got clarity. And in the end, clarity was worth more to me than any confrontation could have been. If you were in my position, would you have confronted her the moment you noticed the small things? Or would you have built the full case first, the way I did? Let me know in the comments. And if this story kept you watching until the end, hit like and subscribe for more.